Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining for another Iron Age story review. And I say Iron Age story because today I want to look at Fleet of Theseus from Anvil Magazine. I don't plan to do this with every story in Anvil Magazine. That would be a lot of videos and take a lot of time. I just don't have that much to say about all of them. Some of them are quite good and enjoyable, but I don't have that much feedback to offer. So I'm going to do probably one, maybe two more videos on this, but I think just one. And I want to use Fleet of Theseus as an example of, I think, some of the ideas that I really like, and also some of the places I see for improvement in the product. So the cover of Anvil Magazine is a scene from Fleet of Theseus, and some of the internal art is, I mean, all of the internal art is quite good, but in particular for this story, I think some of the art did some heavy lifting. And I'm not sure if it's the official intention of Richard and Daniel to have the art carry part of the story or not. But I think art did make this particular story more understandable. Let me get into the basics of the story before we get too far into it. And I'm going to discuss the story briefly. I'm going to, as usual, offer a spoiler warning, and then I'm going to talk about things in a little more depth. There are a few issues I think I can only properly discuss with spoilers. And it is a short story, so that complicates things as well. One of the things I would offer as feedback is when stories are being sent back for edits, I would try and get clearer descriptions in one or two places. I know I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, perhaps more so. But there are things in this story that were not described that I really felt needed to be described. For example, this creature right here is a tunnel crawler, and really all we get for those creatures is the name tunnel crawler and the mention that they have a lot of legs. I forget the exact number, but I think it was in the 70s somewhere. That kind of gave me the idea of an insectoid creature right away, but I wasn't sure what it looked like other than a bunch of legs and long. And a little more description of that would have been nice, particularly how it uses weapons. Of course, in the picture, you can see, I don't know if you can see, but the picture shows clearly that it has a couple of guns loaded on the front of its helmet. I assume the helmet is a single piece. I'm not 100% sure there, but there is a mention of another kind of alien creature called a cliff jumper, I believe. And we don't get almost any description at all of that, except that it has a pair of withered or vestigial arms. And I'm clearly still, if you can't tell, still really confused by what that creature is supposed to be, what it looks like, what purpose its arms may have served, why it's called a cliff jumper. I have a lot of questions there. Long story short. And I would have liked a little more description of that. If I had edited that, that would have been a note I gave. Not a lot, but at least maybe not a paragraph, a sentence or two to hint at what kind of creature it is. Give it an analogy to a creature on Earth, if there is one. There clearly was in the case of the tunnel crawler. So that's one piece of feedback I would offer. Another that is not unique to Fleet of Theseus is nothing is italicized. In particular, the name of the ship in there, the Serendipity, is not italicized, and that was jarring to me. I know that probably we don't use AP rules or Strunks and White when setting this up, but I did find it really jarring that things like ship names, internal monologue. There are a couple of places in here where internal monologues take place, but they're not italicized. They're presented like the rest of the text, not even broken out with quotes or anything like that. That was kind of jarring to me. So let's move on past the general stuff. I found Fleet of Theseus to be really good storytelling. It's a suspense story, and it does a good job setting up the stakes of the story, why it's suspenseful, the motivations of our characters to an extent. The motivations of the characters are very well established. All of that is really good. When our heroes get to this abandoned ship that they're raiding for parts to repair their own aging and broken down ship, the atmosphere and the setup of this derelict hulk is really great. right away things are weird because they don't find any bodies. A couple of characters comment on it. Not sure why this is the case. When they do find bodies, it's almost a relief, except that now they found bodies, so you got to wonder why, what changed at this point. It's very interesting. It's very well set up. There's a lot of suspense to it, in spite of it being a short story. I liked it a lot. I like the primary question of, the idea that at some point, not only at some point when you replace all the parts in a thing, you have something different, but at some point, continuing to replace the parts in a thing could be a sign of madness. And you have to ask yourself if you've reached that point yet. I think it's very interesting that our protagonists wrestle with this. I think it's particularly meta in the fact that a storyteller is essentially taking old stories that they have heard before. They're changing out parts. I mean, it's not that simple. But all stories are essentially retellings on a theme, right? I talk about this a lot. I talk about the story circle and how every story you value is a story you must be able to tell. You're essentially taking an old story and you're changing the parts out a little bit. And if you were to follow a story all the way back through its pedigree, through every change of parts, you'll eventually come to the realization that, hey, I'm not telling maybe a Superman story anymore. I created my own superhero and now we have the Hulk. Or maybe you're telling a story about a really daring, adventurous, swashbuckling character, and you're not talking about the Scarlet Pimpernel anymore. You're talking about Zorro. You're not talking about Zorro anymore. You're talking about some modern-day swashbuckler. Indiana Jones, or, well, maybe he's not the best example, although since the latest movie came out not too long ago, he's kind of on my mind. You can follow that kind of lineage back, but you know that at some point, your story is different from everyone else's. So I found that really fascinating. I found the presentation of it, where Snow does not take one side or the other. It makes it very clear that at some point in the continuity of things, you have to do this. And at some point on the continuity of things, you have to stop doing this. It's just, where is the lines? That is the real struggle here. And he does a great job of presenting it in an engaging and fascinating way. And also, in a way that's, it's probably scary if you've never read a story like this before. I found it just a little creepy, and I found the presentation and the execution to be excellent. One critique that I would offer Snow as a storyteller is the central motive of our heroes is they are the keepers of a flotilla, the last ships of the Terran Union. We don't know a whole lot about the Terran Union, but we know these are the last survivors of it, and they hold on to this identity because it is valuable to them, and they believe that the Terran Union is a sign of freedom. All well and good, but I have a lot of questions about this remaining fleet of the Terran Union after reading the story. And they seem to be natural questions that I would have expected maybe a very brief throwaway answer to. Again, this could be just a sentence or two, but why did they never find their own planet? What about the Terran Union sets them apart from the other organizations, the two major ones, the Alliance and the Republic, that are around them? What makes it the survivors of the fleet obviously are not all human. They are not all Earthlings, unless Earth in Snow's world was considerably different than the one we know. The cliff jumpers and the tunnel crawlers, they don't look like Terran creatures. So why are they so invested in the idea of the Terran Union? These are a lot of questions that the story makes no attempt to answer. And I guess I can understand the confines of a short story not letting you get too deeply into that. But I don't understand why they couldn't just find a planet of their own, why they didn't try and move out beyond the boundaries of the settled competing interstellar powers. Space is a big place. You don't have to stay stuck on, slowly decaying ships in the middle of deep space in order to remain independent from surrounding celestial powers. At least that's how it seems to me. And clearly, these Terran survivors, they're very resourceful, they're very tough, they're very resilient, and I respect their cause. I just don't understand why they thought their cause was best served by remaining on these decaying ships that were falling apart more and more every generation. And that sticking point made it difficult for me to completely invest in the characters as presented. Maybe that was intentional. Maybe we're not supposed to see them as entirely well-founded in this rather Sisyphean task that they've undertaken. But if that's the case, I would have liked to see a bad justification more than no justification. That would have given me more indication that I'm not supposed to take this objection entirely seriously. Sci-fi has the ability to present us with characters who have very bad presuppositions about the world, but are still heroic and respectable. A great example of this, and one of the first really interesting, complex, not terribly complex, but nuanced sci-fi books I read was Raiders from the Rings by Alan E. Nourse. And none of the factions in there behave entirely ethically. In fact, there are gaps in ethical behavior you could drive a planet through. They all behave badly, but that doesn't, as factions, that's important. As factions, they all behave badly. But we do see individuals who are doing their best to behave morally. And that tension is a big part of what drives the story. And if that's supposed to be a driving part of Fleet of Theseus, I needed it expounded on a little bit more. I would have really liked to see that. And so I would have liked to see and get a better sense of that. Now, it does make me very interested in other things that Daniel Snow has written. I do intend to try and track down, some of his other stories. There's a brief mention of other works from at the end of every author's entry in the book or in the magazine. So I do intend to see if I can see what else he's done and try and track some of that down in the future. So as a tie-in, that works, but I think it would have worked just as well if I had some inkling of what exactly drove the Terran Union to stand apart from these other two factions. So that is my one suggestion to Daniel Snow on how I would have improved this and something he could watch out for. All in all, though, really great story. I found the protagonist interesting. I found the questions interesting. And I found the scenario, for lack of a better term, very well executed on. So that's the end of my spoiler-free review. Get more into the critiques. And I am going to spoil the story now. I recommend reading this before getting the story spoiled, because it is pretty good. Some more detailed critique. One thing I found really interesting was I knew that the monster was a robot ahead of time. How did I know that? Well, Snow sets it up really, really well. Before we ever see the monster, which is a rogue AI that has been potentially damaged, or at the least its programming has become corrupted, and thinks it can reassemble and reactivate its dead crewmates. It's trying to essentially resuscitate the people on its starship by chopping up other people and using them as spare parts for its deceased crewmates, which is at once, understandable. It has a robot brain. It might very well think that way, and horrifying, because we know that's not how it works. And all of its old crewmates, if there's anything left of them, are just these weird freeze-dried, vacuum-sealed piles of human or alien guts scattered on a table. That's a great and rather disturbing image to offer people, and I congratulate Snow on executing on it very well. But he also took pains to let us know that we were dealing with a mechanical rather than a human monster very early, because he describes places where the robot has left its tools out, and it's organized them in a neat grid with rows and columns, and it's all just floating there in zero gravity, which is a great mental image and does a great job of taking advantage of the unique environment the characters are in to create this disturbing image. Again, very good work by Snow. Of course, also one of the first things we see that it's done, first evidences of it, is that it's removed the arms from another robot, and apparently use them to repair itself. And that is another clue to the creature's psychology even before we see it and before we get it expounded on. So, really great work there. I have high praise for that. By the same token, some of the descriptions of the way conduits and pieces and components are swapped out in the fleet the Serendipity is a part of are reminiscent of the descriptions we later get of the bodies that the robot has chopped up. Again, there is a thematic parallel there, and while Snow draws attention to it directly, having it shown there indirectly is a nice touch. One of my critiques is I do feel the exposition by our protagonist, I'm not sure exposition is the right word, but he definitely draws our attention to the thematic line of the story there as well. And I understand why you do that, Mr. Snow, and I understand the compulsion to do it. And I don't think actually doing it is bad. It may have just been a little too heavy-handed. I think bringing up the actual ship of Theseus in your text may have been a step too far, or at least in this particular case. I personally would have just had the protagonist refer back to the Serendipity rather than the ship of Theseus. This is, of course, just a matter of approach and storytelling. Obviously, Daniel Snow can write his story however he wants. I just found it to be a little much. So, maybe that reference or having it repeatedly worked better for you. For me, it took me out of the story just a touch. Just a touch. I like that there is this deep and rich well of lore, and it's one of the things that makes me think that Daniel Snow was trying to say something not just about human nature, but about storytelling. He wove this story into it. Maybe I'm imagining that. Maybe it's just because that is my personal bugaboo. I could be layering that on top of the story. But either way, whether it's something Daniel intended to put there, or whether it's something that his story is so well crafted I could bring to it, either way, that's good storytelling. Whether you are deliberately working these threads in, or whether you have left room for people to bring their own 2 cents to the story to it. Either one of those is good. And, so this is, regardless of how it shakes out, another good move by Snow. I just think maybe there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And for me, went just a hair past that point. This is not a strong critique, but it is something I think to think about. And, maybe in a week you will ask me again about this, and I'll say, well, maybe it was good. It's one of those things that you may just have a different opinion on depending on when you write it, what day of the week it is. This is also true of the writing craft. All in all, very good stuff. Very interesting stuff. One of the other things I had in here, again, a world building question that I think would have helped the story a little bit better, is a sense of get 2 understandings of how humans deal with non-humans in the story. We see very clearly that the Terran Union, or at least the survivors of the Terran Union, are okay with aliens. They have like tunnel crawlers and cliff jumpers and whatever other weird creatures they have on the fleet. In fact, I think at one point they say there's only 2 humans on the Serendipity's bridge crew. I'm not sure how many people total that is, but only 2 of them are human. And by the same token, we know that the Republic, which is some kind of theocratic republic apparently, considers androids to be full citizens, as opposed to just a labor class. Again, very interesting that they would treat AI that way. I would have liked to have a better sense. Well, I guess the Republic is put in contrast to the Terran Union and the Alliance in that respect. So we have a sense of how they treat androids. I would have liked to have a sense of how aliens fit into the picture for the other 2 factions, just so it might tell us part of why the Union holds itself apart from these other 2 factions. But again, I can't say for sure. Also, there is a constant reference to the fact that the Terran Union represents freedom as opposed to these other two groups. And again, I don't really know how that's the case or why at least leave it to be the case. I would have liked to have a better sense of that because, again, this speaks to the motive of our characters, which is very important because they are on this location investigating the ship because they don't want to either settle a planet themselves or join with another faction. So all of this was a bit of a question mark for me. Another thing I would have liked to see addressed, I'm not sure how the robot managed to survive as long as it did. We see it scavenging parts from other robots, which is good, but there's a strong implication that other people have tried to salvage this ship and been killed by the android, and yet our scavengers off of a nearly derelict hundreds of year old ship with second rate scrounged equipment were able to destroy it. Doesn't really add up to me. I would think that other scavengers would have been ready to deal with this, maybe lost some people, but the math there isn't quite clear unless there was originally more than one android, or perhaps the ship had more defenses. I don't know. There are other possibilities, but we don't get any kind of hint as to what they are. Kind of left with the robot somehow doing all of these things up until this point, at which point it suddenly becomes incapable of doing that. That doesn't add up entirely. I get it that you can't go too deep into these things in a short story. Again, I would have just liked maybe a sentence or two to explain this, especially once they get out of the ship and they're able to talk to the Serendipity again. They have a better sense of maybe the history of this derelict fleet they've stumbled across. All in all, these are not deal breakers. In fact, they only detract a little bit from a very good story that I was very excited to read and I found very interesting. So, yeah, I think it's a great story. I think it's a good reason to pick up Anvil Magazine on its own, in digital at the very least. If it was the only good story in there, I would say it's probably not worth the cost of the physical. But since it's not, and again, I'm going to talk more about other stuff I like in Anvil Magazine. I think this is well worth the price of a physical copy. It's a good story all around. I'd love to talk more about the other stuff. I am going to, in point of fact, but we've been here for a while. I don't want to talk your ear off. So, if you've read Anvil Magazine, let me know what your favorite story is down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.